Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of Random Thoughts and Views with Jan. In this episode, I'm going to briefly talk about the world-renowned British Broadcasting Corporation, aka the BBC, and yet another disturbing scandal involving yet another well-paid BBC employee, now former employee, and the corporation's habit of mishandling historical allegations of sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, and paedophilia. So, here we are again, BBC. But first, let's take a quick look at their roster and the allegations surrounding each individual. First up, Jimmy Savile, a long-term and well-loved BBC entertainer who was discovered to be one of Britain's most prolific sex offenders, committing offences on BBC premises for at least 6 decades. Savile had befriended and had close relationships with royalty and political figures. He also cultivated an image as an eccentric but charitable figure, raising millions for hospitals, and was also knighted in 1990. After his death in 2011, hundreds of allegations emerged, accusing him of sexual abuse spanning decades. Victims included children and vulnerable people. The abuse occurred in hospitals, schools, and BBC premises. Authorities and institutions failed to act on warning signs, including the BBC. Then came Rolf Harris, former host of Rolf Harris Cartoon Time, Animal Hospital, and Rolf on Art, who was convicted of multiple indecent assaults. Tim Westwood, former Radio 1 DJ, accused of sexual misconduct and predatory behaviour by several women. Chris Denning, former Radio 1 DJ, who pleaded guilty to 21 historical child sex offences. Stuart Hall, a former BBC broadcaster who was jailed for indecent assaults. Greg Wallace, MasterChef presenter who stepped back in 2024 following allegations of sexual misconduct. Giovanni Panisse and Graziano Di Prima, Strictly Come Dancing professionals who face allegations regarding their conduct with contestants. And last but not least, Hugh Edwards, the former lead presenter of BBC News at 10. In 2023, allegations emerged that a BBC presenter had paid a teenager for explicit images. Edwards was later identified and suspended by the BBC, then resigned in 2024. In July 2024, he pleaded guilty to offences involving indecent images of children. In September 2024, he was given a 6-month prison sentence, suspended for 2 years, placed on the sex offenders register, and ordered to undergo treatment rehabilitation programs. The latest BBC star to be dismissed due to serious allegations is Scott Mills. Scott, one of the BBC's biggest stars, was sacked in an abrupt fashion after nearly 30 years of service. He last appeared on BBC Radio 2 on Tuesday, March 24th, 2026, ending his show with the words, "See you tomorrow." But this would be the last listeners would hear Scott on the airwaves again, because he did not return the following day and was replaced by Gary Mills. His contract was then terminated following allegations regarding his personal conduct on March 3rd, 2026. The BBC then found themselves once again in the position of having to report on themselves and address serious allegations surrounding former long-standing employees.
Scott Mills, the presenter of Radio 2's flagship breakfast show, has been sacked by the BBC following allegations about his personal conduct. In a statement, the corporation confirmed his departure but said it wouldn't comment on individual matters. An email sent to BBC staff acknowledged his sacking would be a shock to audiences and loyal breakfast show listeners. Scott Mills has been a presence on BBC radio and television for more than 25 years. Our culture and media editor, Katie Razzle, reports.
Bravo, Patrick. See you tomorrow.
Bye. Scott Mills ended his Radio 2 show last Tuesday clearly intending to return. But he hasn't been on air since. By the weekend, he'd been sacked. This morning, the BBC's Director of Music, Lorna Clark, wrote to staff, "I wanted to personally let you know that Scott Mills has left The Breakfast Show and the BBC. I know that this news will be sudden and unexpected, and therefore must come as a shock, not least as so many of us have worked with Scott over a great many years." She went on to say, "Of course it will also come as a shock to our audience and loyal Breakfast Show listeners too." So far, the BBC has not been drawn further on Scott Mills' abrupt departure, but we have confirmed it relates to allegations about his personal conduct. It's a humiliating end to a career that took him from teen star on local radio to the heights of success.
So proud of you. I'm proud of you, my friend.
He replaced Zoe Ball last year when she stepped down from the biggest breakfast show in the country.
And this is the Scott Mills Breakfast Show.
More than 30 years after, aged just 16, he became the UK's youngest radio presenter at Power FM in Hampshire.
All right, let's get it started. Let the Eurovision Song Contest begin.
Other career highs included presenting Eurovision, appearing on Strictly Come Dancing,
It's fun. See, yeah, stop.
and in 2024, winning Celebrity Race Across the World. Now, Scott Mills' contract with the BBC has been terminated, and it happened fast. In the week that the outgoing Director General Tim Davie leaves the BBC, another BBC scandal on his watch.
Mr. Edwards, do you apologise for your crimes?
But after Hugh Edwards, the former News at 10 presenter, later convicted of making child abuse images, the BBC launched a review into its culture and practices. This is how Tim Davie told MPs things were changing.
We're not mucking around now. You have to be clear, and to the earlier point, you have to be fair. But if you're not living the values, it is clear you leave the BBC or there are consequences.
The allegations against Scott Mills are not yet public, but the speed the BBC has terminated his contract suggests it wants to make its message clear that no one is irreplaceable.
Upon hearing the news of Scott's sacking, his former colleagues responded.
We're joined now by Nihal Athanayake, who is a former BBC radio DJ himself and a colleague of Scott Mills in the past. Morning to you, Nihal.
Morning,
Thank you for joining me.
Good morning.
I mean, it seems to me, for those who work at the BBC now, and of course for the likes of you who've worked at the BBC previously, this was quite a shock, wasn't it, about Scott Mills? What was your reaction when you heard the news?
This was not on anyone's Monday bingo card, was it, that Scott Mills, one of the most high-profile presenters on the BBC, was going to be fired? I mean, the shock. And also as well, of course, as has been pointed out previously this morning, is this is kind of one lurching from one crisis to another, it seems. And lots of people like me who had worked with Scott for a number of years, this was always his dream. Of all of the Radio 1 presenters, my generation, which is, the Fern Cottons and the Reggies and the Vernons, the one person you knew would end up eventually on Radio 2 was Scott Mills. That was, everybody knew it and everyone spoke about it. So he got his dream job first at Drive and then, of course, going to Breakfast. And look, I need to say this, that me personally, my first thoughts are obviously with the alleged victim here, without question. But also, Scott Mills is a human. He's a person who got his dream job. That has now been taken away from him. And his validation largely in life probably was defined by that job. Therefore, we have to be very careful. There's a current feeding frenzy going on. A lot of that is driven by people who just hate the BBC. So they'll use that as a stick to beat the BBC with. But there is a human being, well, there's two human beings at the centre of this. And we all know what happened to Caroline Flack and how the public the press rounded on her. And we have to be very careful about this, not just, of course, for the victim, but for Scott as well.
The BBC would later go on to reveal more details about Scott's personal conduct allegations.
Breaking news to bring you now from the Metropolitan Police, saying that Scott Mills, the former BBC Radio 2 presenter, who was questioned by officers in 2018 over allegations of sexual offences, can now reveal that the investigation was made against allegations against a teenage boy who was under the age of 16 years old. That investigation in 2018 later closed due to lack of evidence. The further details there is the age of those who the allegations were made. A teenage boy under the age of 16. Scott Mills questioned, but no further developments in that because the investigation later closed due to lack of evidence. But there were further developments only just a few days ago when the BBC terminated its contract with the former Radio 2 breakfast host and host of its Eurovision coverage, plus plenty of other elements of BBC output over many decades now. Let's bring in our correspondent Molly Malone, who's outside the BBC's headquarters. And Molly, just tell us more.
Well, we're starting to understand a little bit more about what might have led the BBC to make what appeared to be, at surface level, a fairly abrupt and sudden move to sack Scott Mills, one of their long-standing and high-profile presenters here. It's understood that Scott Mills was questioned by police back in 2018 over allegations reported to have happened between 1997 and 2000, and those allegations were of, according to the Met Police, serious sexual offences against a teenage boy who, in the last few minutes, the Met Police have now said was under the age of 16. But this case was later dropped in 2019 after the CPS said that there was insufficient evidence to bring charges. I'll give you some more of the timeline from the Met Police statement. They said in December 2016, the Met began an investigation following a referral from another police force. The investigation related to allegations of serious sexual offences against a teenage boy. These were reported to have taken place between 1997 and 2000, and as part of these inquiries, a man in his 40s at the time of the interview was questioned by police under caution in 2018. A full file of evidence was submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service, who determined the evidential threshold had not been met to bring charges. Following this advice, the investigation was closed in May 2019, and hence it's important to make clear that these do remain allegations. But this news yesterday, didn't it? It appeared to be fairly sudden, fairly abrupt. Some context now, perhaps, to help understand why this is happening.
In a public statement, Scott Mills said, "The recent announcement that I am no longer contracted to the BBC has led to the publication of rumour and speculation. An allegation was made against me in 2016 of a historic sexual offence, which was the subject of a police investigation in which I fully cooperated and responded to in 2018. As the police have stated, a file of evidence was submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service, which determined that the evidential threshold had not been met to bring charges. Since the investigation related to an allegation that dates back nearly 30 years and the police investigation was closed 7 years ago, I hope that the public and the media will understand and respect my wish not to make any further public comment on this matter. I wish to thank from the bottom of my heart all those who have reached out to me with kindness, my former colleagues and my beloved listeners, who I greatly miss." What I've learned about the BBC: when the BBC is backed into a corner, they go into panic mode. They just panic. That has been the pattern with the corporation as more and more allegations involving their talent continue to make headlines post the Jimmy Savile scandal. They race to be seen to be handling matters by sacking people once allegations become public knowledge, only when they become public knowledge. And then it's revealed that they were aware of the allegations years, decades beforehand. But they swept them under the carpet while continuing to pay those same employees salaries with public funding. Now, for those who are unaware, the BBC charges a licence fee annually, and it is the primary source of funding for the BBC's public service operations, which includes the salaries of its presenters, journalists, and on-screen personalities. As licensed players, we deserve transparency when it comes to matters of this nature. Now, there's this huge rush to distance themselves from anything relating to Scott Mills. According to reports, the BBC has wiped him from Top of the Pops. Episodes where he features have been removed from their archives, and a plaque dedicated to him has been removed. Channel 4 has pulled the last episode of The Great Celebrity Bake Off. because it features Scott. They said in a statement, acknowledging the seriousness of the accusations that have been made against Scott, we don't believe it would be appropriate to air the episode at this time. Scott is also stepping back from his ambassador role at the UK's largest MS charity. Scott has quietly been removed from Boyzone gig at Arsenal Stadium, and a plaque dedicating a service station bridge to Scott has been removed. The plaque for the Scott Mills Bridge was put up at Fleet Services on the M3 on March 16th, 2016, following a light-hearted campaign on his then Radio 1 show with Chris Stark to get the bridge named after him. Now, a decade after, the plaque has been removed. One minute you're on top of the world, the next, this happens. But going back to Scott's public statement, if you notice one thing about that statement, Scott didn't deny any wrongdoing. Usually when a media personality faces this level of scandal and issues a statement, they usually end that statement with, I categorically deny any wrongdoing. That is missing from Scott's statement. I'm not accusing him of anything. He hasn't been found guilty of any wrongdoing. This is just an observation. I personally believe that there is more to this. There's more to come. I think the BBC, they're holding off from revealing everything they know until a tabloid newspaper forces them to reveal everything they know. Watch this space. And that concludes today's episode. But for more news, views and thoughts, visit X, Mad News UK, Instagram, Mad News UK, and madnewsuk.com.